Greetings from West Visayasn Conference, comprising 5 provinces of Panay and Guimaras Islands. These 5 provinces are Aklan, Antique, Capiz, Iloilo, and Guimaras. During this COVID lockdown, WVC earns several meanings. For some, WVC may mean working with vigilance in crisis. We value compassion, we value charity, working with vitality for Christ, and many more. These added meanings speak of the values of West Visayasn Conference. This time, let me study with you on the story of a certain individual who demonstrated exemplary values during the crisis. And let me entitle this study, The God in Crisis, Seeing His Image in Mount Carmel. The story was so familiar. And this is mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 18. And we are told that there was that deep spiritual crisis in the kingdom of Israel. This was evident by the destruction of the altars of the Lord. This was evident by the big number of false prophets. Imagine 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of Astarte. And worse, my dear friends, was the fact that this Baal worship was supported, funded by the government. With this, the Lord brought judgment to the nation. There was that 3 years of drought and famine. The drought was so severe that King Ahab and one of his chief officers took the responsibility themselves to look for the spring in the land for the animals to survive. That time, the Lord told Elijah to show himself to King Ahab. You see, it was a dangerous move. In a sense, my dear friends, that King Ahab then was so eager in finding him. The chapter mentioned that he searched in various places and kingdoms, and let the people took an oath for the whereabout of Elijah. But the Lord had told Elijah then, and Elijah obeyed God even in that particular situation. And so Elijah met Obadiah and told him to tell King Ahab to come to him. And so the day came that King Ahab had met Elijah. That time, King Ahab blamed Elijah for the trouble in Israel. And Elijah said that it was not him, but it was due to the fact that they disobeyed the commandments of God and they worship Baal at that time. You see, in that particular story and in that particular line, we could say that this seemed to forecast the earth's final crisis, wherein the issue would be about the commandments of God and the issue would be about worship. If you read Revelation chapter 13, the worship has been mentioned 7 times, which would be the issue in the last days. And so, it would be good, my dear friends, for us to reflect on the God that is being mentioned right here in Mount Carmel, for us to be able to be strengthened in our relationship and as we face the final crisis. Elijah then told King Ahab to bring the people to Mount Carmel together with the prophets of Baal. The day came for the showdown, and the rules were set. Elijah said that they have to, to choose first for the sacrifice, and they would be given enough time to pray for their God. Looking into the situation, some may say that it would be for the advantage of the group of King Ahab. For basically, Mount Carmel was considered to be the sacred place of Baal. So we could say that there was that home court advantage at that time. And talking about the number, we could say that it was not about 1-to-1 showdown or the first 5 versus 1, but it was the 450 versus 1, who is Elijah at that time. And it was told that the God who would be answering by fire would be the true God. Again, in this particular scene, in the eyes of the Oriental people at that time, they may say that they were at the advantage point in that particular showdown, because Baal was considered to be the god of the storm and the rain. And they believed that it was Baal who had been sending lightning in the land of Israel. And so that was the picture, the background at that time. And so the prophets of Baal started. They offered the sacrifice. And we are told that they jumped, they leaped up and down for that. They danced and shouted for Baal to answer their prayer, for Baal to bring fire to consume the sacrifice. But we are told in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 26, that they did the shouting from morning till noon. They said, "O Baal, answer us. Baal, answer us." They shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. They did the shouting. They did the jumping. Elijah then highlighted or magnified the futility of the gods of the people of Ahab. He said, it might be that your God was in a journey, or it might be that your God is somewhat very busy at that time, or probably he might be sleeping at that time. For that time, the Oriental believes, my dear friends, that the gods were attention seekers, and his attention need to be caught, to be called for the situation. And so they shouted and shouted and shouted until they got tired. They were so exhausted until they retired or they retreated. That time that they retired, it was toward the evening sacrifice. And it was now the turn of Elijah to offer the sacrifice. He took 12 stones, reconstructed the altar of the Lord, put some woods, put the bullock as the sacrifice, and he tried to eliminate the possible suspicion of fraud. And he dug a trench around the altar so that people may not think about the trickery, as well as that fire would be coming from somewhere else. And so, not only that, he poured 12 barrels of water to the sacrifice until the woods became wet and the waters dripped into the trench, and the trench was filled with the water. After that one, Elijah uttered a simple prayer, unlike with the prayers of the prophets of Baal. And his prayer was, he said, "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that these people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again." What a simple prayer, but full of meanings. After the prayer of Elijah, fire came down, fell from the Lord, and consumed the burnt sacrifice. Not just the burnt sacrifice, my dear friends, but even the woods. Not just the woods, but even the stones and the dust. And it consumed the water that was in the trench. Friends, ordinarily, during the sacrifice, what would be burned would just be the burnt sacrifice in the woods. But at this time, including the stones, the altars, and even the water was licked, was consumed by the fire. It was beyond the ordinary situation. And this would remind us of one big important lesson, my dear friends, that the God that we are serving, God answers prayers. He answered the prayers beyond our expectations. When West Visayasn Conference resolved to enter the unentered places, the 31 unentered towns with no churches in the town proper, we tried to prioritize the big towns, which would be the first places to be entered. One of these towns that we identified is the town of Paglaum, with more than 100 barangays. I called then the district pastor and told him to look for a land. And he said, Pastor, if we have to find for a land, do we have money to buy the land? I simply told him, none. And he said, so what are we going to do? And he said, we have to do the usual things in fundraising through social media. We have to do the things that we used to do in West Visayasn Academy when I was still serving right there. And so he looked for a land. Several days after, he called and said, Pastor Kerry, we have found already land, 1,000 square meters. I asked him, how much is the cost of the land? And he said, 5,000 per square meter. And that would cost us 5 million pesos. And I said, it would be difficult for us to identify one person to give the 5 million pesos. But if it would be easy for us to find a person who could give us 5,000 pesos. We need only to look for 1,000 people who could give us 5,000, at least 5,000 pesos. And so I posted the sponsorship opportunity in a Facebook. A week after, I tried to check my Facebook. There was no response. Second week, I checked, no response. No sponsor. Third week, no sponsor. Fourth week, no sponsor. I called then the pastor and said, is there any land with a lesser price compared to the previous one? He said, Pastor, we have found another 1,000 square meters near the University of the Philippines, Visayas. And I said, how much? And he said, it would cost us 3,000 per square meter, and that would cost 3 million pesos. I said, 3,000 is better than 5,000. And so again, I posted the sponsorship opportunity in the Facebook. And with that, my dear friends, at first week, somebody contacted and said, Pastor, I will sponsor 1 square meter. The second week, somebody said, I will sponsor 2 square meters. I was so excited then because the numbers seemed to be increasing and increasing. On the third week, I checked again my Facebook and I found somebody commented and said, I will be sponsoring 3 square meters. I was so excited to check for the fourth week. And when I looked at the Facebook, I could not find any sponsor. The succeeding weeks, none. And so I said to the Lord, Lord, isn't it that you have told us to preach the Gospels, to all the world and to these places. Now, Lord, where are the resources? We need 3 million pesos. By that time, somebody sent an email to me and said, Pastor Kerry, I heard that you have been looking for a land for the church. I have a property right there near the plaza. Kindly check that one. It might be an ideal place for the church. If it would be okay, then I have to give that for free. I was dumbfounded at that time, my dear friends. I was so amazed on how the Lord had answered the prayer. Beyond my asking. I asked only for 3 million pesos, but He did not give the 3 million pesos. He did not give the 5 million pesos, but He had His plan other than what I was asking. I do believe that He had in His mind a different thing. He would not give that 5 million pesos, He would not give that 3 million pesos, but He would give for free. What an amazing God at that time, my dear friends. Then I realized, at that time, I had two realizations at that time. First, I realized that it was not all about my fundraising skills. It was not about the Facebook, but I need only to look at His face, for it is He that could answer the prayer. He could answer prayers above my asking. For Paul said in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. Now, He could answer the prayers beyond our asking. He could answer our prayers beyond our thinking, my dear friends. Yes, this is the kind of God that we are serving. The God who can answer the prayer beyond our imagination. Now, let us go back to the story. When the Lord answered the prayer of Elijah and sent the fire from heaven, He told King Ahab and said, you eat first, because that time it was, I think, a day that he was not able to eat, I suppose. And Elijah said, while I will be going to spend a prayer. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 42, it says that Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he cast down himself upon the earth, and he prayed on his knees. Now, that time, my dear friends, that time he prayed in Mount Carmel. And he sent his servant to check whether there was a sign for the rain. And his servant went, and he returned and reported and said there was no sign. And I could just but imagine, my dear friends, at that time, Elijah again wrestled in prayer. And he sent again his servant for the second time. And he reported and said there was no sign. The third one, again, he reported there was no sign for the rain. Fourth time, he came back again and reported no sign. Fourth, fifth, no sign. Sixth time, no sign. Friends, if you will analyze, God had answered the prayer of Elijah differently, different from the one that he answered just but once his prayer when he burned the sacrifice. God is wiser, and He had several ways and several forms to answer our prayers. Let us trust Him for that. And on the seventh time, my dear friends, Elijah again commanded the servant to look for a sign. And then when he returned, he said in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 44, there ariseth a little cloud out of the sea, like a man's hand. In some other version, it is just like but a palm's size cloud. But even with that particular thing, my dear friends, you will notice that Elijah told the servant, go to Ahab and tell him that there would be a rain that would be coming and he need to be hurried to go to the city of Jezreel. Now, and that time, my dear friends, indeed, there was a rain that happened in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 45. Now, friends, there was that rain. There was that rain. Friends, 3 years passed. 3 years passed. God had promised, had prophesied for a rain. And He fulfilled that particular thing 3 years after. And this would remind us that God is a promise keeper. He is a covenant-keeping God. He promised, and He is true with His promise. He is a promise keeper. And the faith of Elijah at this time, my dear friends, he was so confident enough that when the God uttered the promises, He would really fulfill. For in this case, even when there was no rain yet, according to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 41, he could hear the sound of the abundance of the rain. What a faith, what a trust on the words of God, my dear friends, that a God is a promise keeper. No rain yet, and yet he already heard the sound of the abundance of rain. The abundance of rain. Friends, he could turn the impossible into Him possible. During my first year as the principal of West Visayasn Academy, we did a situational analysis on the issues of the academy. That time, we have found out, my dear friends, that the situation, the enrollment was decreasing and decreasing. I could still remember, I think it was about 185. There were several issues that we have discovered. But one thing that we have found out, my dear friends, was the scholarship programs, the fund was diminishing and diminishing that time. There was a sponsor and author of several books who had been supporting for more than 20 students. But we have discovered that the fund was dwindling and dwindling simply because that he became older and older, and by that the books that he wrote kept on decreasing as well, and no royalty until the scholarship fund was stopped. Now, I asked him the question, would there be a possibility that advocacy would continue even when a person died? He had that advocacy for working students at that time. And so he established the scholarship program. I asked the question, how could we have a sustainable scholarship program for the academy? And that time, I attended the seminar on philanthropy by the Southern Asia Pacific Division. I think that was the first time that the philanthropic department was introduced. And I learned in that particular seminar about this endowment program. It runs in the principle, eat the fruit, but do not cut the tree. And I have discovered, my dear friends, that the endowment is also a program of many top schools in the Philippines and even schools, colleges throughout the world. And so I said, we need to have this kind of program. But the question then was, where would we get the money? Where would we put the money, even just for a small amount, wherein it would generate some sort of high interest to be able to sustain the scholarship program? And so we visited several banks in Iloilo, and there I discovered about the government securities, mutual fund, the treasury bills, and I have learned about the UNLAD, UNISA programs. I remember then that I visited the manager of one of the biggest banks in Iloilo. I told him, sir, we have this dream. We dream for young people to be educated. We dream for young people to have a better future. And so would you mind designing a product wherein if we put fund right here in your bank, this would generate a bigger interest? Would you mind designing for that product? We want you to share with this particular dream. And so, my dear friends, he explained several programs. Then later on, he interrupted and said, how much money would you be putting in the bank? How many millions would you be putting in this particular program? At that time, I was so dumbfounded, my dear friends. I kept silent for several seconds. Then I regained composure and said, Sir, because at that time, not even a single cent was in my pocket and even in the school for that particular program. I simply said, Sir, I'm expecting for several millions. And I will just be returning right here when I could see a beautiful products and programs wherein it would generate the interest. And so, I went out of the bank. That time, I asked the Lord, and I told the Lord, Lord, how come that I mentioned about millions when we do not have the millions? Where will we get the money? Where will we get the money? Then somebody called me and said, Sir Kerry, my grandmother died. Please come for you to conduct the necrological service. And that evening, we did the service. And after the service, this supporter of West Visayasn Academy approached me and said, Sir Kerry, we have paid already the memorial park. We have paid already the coffin. And we have paid already for the food, supplies. And there is some money left right here. And I want you to design a program that would immortalize and would make my grandmother be remembered in terms of Christian education. That time I was so happy. I was thinking, Lord, this might be the answer to my prayer. For after all, there were several members of the family coming from the U.S., from other countries. And so this might be the answer, oh God. And so this individual told me and said, Sir Kerry, here is an envelope. It has 20,000 pesos. I said then to the Lord silently, Lord, I have been asking for millions and now you gave me only 20,000 pesos. But even then, we tried to manage the 20,000 pesos. We decided that during the recognition program for the next year, then we will be awarding even just a subsidy, even just a little for that particular program for the beneficiaries. And so the recognition program came and we award this Adila Revilla Victoriano Scholarship Fund. And so when we awarded this thing, after the program, several people came to me and said, Sir Kerry, what is this endowment all about? Could we also put some funds for this particular program? And so one after the other, money kept on coming in, my dear friends. And it was not only for the scholarship, and it opened other possibilities, other projects to be funded by endowment. And mind you, that 20,000 pesos right now is almost 9 million pesos. Friends, the Lord had promised, I still believe that time that the Lord had promised that He would bless His school. And I would say that indeed, He is a promise keeper. Ellen G. White had said in the Selected Messages, Book 1, page 124, when the way is prepared for the Spirit of God, the blessings will come. Satan can no more hinder a shower of blessing from descending upon God's people that he can close the windows of heaven. That rain cannot come upon the earth. Friends, if we will be connected with this promise keeper God, and if we will have that faith that He will fulfill His promise, the pen of inspiration tells us that prayer and faith will do what no power on earth can accomplish. Ministry of Healing, page 59. Now let us go back to the prayer of Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 36 and 37. It says, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at a word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that these people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. In this prayer, my dear friends, you will notice the four major concerns of Elijah. And these concerns are all about for the glory of God. Now let me mention these four concerns for the succeeding lessons. First, it says that they may know that thou, O Lord, art God. Elijah would like to emphasize in this particular concern that there is that living God, the God who is unlike with the God of the prophets of Baal, who could not listen, who could not answer the prayer of this living God, is so active in terms and so involved in terms of their lives, and He is listening to their prayers. And this particular God, this living God, could bring peace in their troubled life by way of answering and providing their needs. And the second one that was mentioned by Elijah is that the people may know that I am thy servant. Elijah right here would like to emphasize that he belongs to God, and that his work is simply a service to Him. The third one, that the people may know that I have done all these things at thy word. That he was simply following God's commandments. For the issue then, as mentioned already in the previous narrative, you will notice that Elijah then said that the trouble that the people of Israel were experiencing that time because they did not obey the commandments of God. And it would be by the obedience of the word, as exemplified by Elijah, that there will be order and peace in the land. He was simply following God's commandment. And the fourth one, and the fourth concern, was that the people may know that thou hast turned their heart back again. Now, my dear friends, if you have to take a look at this particular, the fourth one, I'd like to magnify on this fourth concern. Because right here, you will notice that it's all about the burden of saving souls. You could have a glimpse of the heart of Elijah, that his heart was all about the mission. And he was so zealous for this particular one. And his longing, her intense desire, her earnest desire was for these people to know and to be back to the Lord. And this is further strengthened by the verse in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 37, when it says, "Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that his people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their back again." Basically, in Hebrew language, long before there were no punctuation marks. And so they devised many ways to be able to express the sentiment, the feelings, the emphasis in other ways. And one of these is by way of repeating the words. And here in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 37, you will notice right here that Elijah repeated the words, "Hear me." It says, "Hear me, O Lord, hear me." This reflects, my dear friends, the earnest pleading. The earnest pleading. He was so emphatic in saying, "Lord, please hear." Hear in what? It says, "Hear me, that these people may know that thou art the Lord God," that the people may know you as the living God, and that these people may turn their back to you. And so this is a prayer of mission, my dear friends, a reflection of the earnest longing of and the love of Elijah to the mission. And I believe that this is one of the many reasons why Elijah was considered to be a type of John the Baptist, and that of the remnant church in the last days. For it is said right here in Luke chapter 1, verse 17, he will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. Now, friends, when the Bible tells us the spirit and power of Elijah, then it was elaborated by way of the works and the mission. So basically, here it was depicted and it was portrayed about the being of Elijah, and that would be the being for the love of the mission, for the love of the mission. Now, let us all remember that during this time in the prayer of Elijah, there was a crisis then. There was a crisis. But in that particular crisis, Elijah saw and described the opportunities for mission. Even in the midst of the crisis, he saw it as a time for mission, and it would be an opportunity for people to be brought back to God. And so in crisis and no crisis, it's all about the mission. That's why the pen of inspiration tells us in Prophets and Kings, page 221, it says, God asked us to give His service the first place in our lives, to allow no day to pass without doing something to advance His work in the earth. Basically, service, mission should be the first in our lives. Let it be that there would be no day for us not to think about the mission. Moment by moment, many times, my dear friends, we are very busy of thinking for our personal lives. We keep on thinking about how to make our business prosperous, how to do this and that. But we are reminded by the pen of inspiration that every day, there should never be a day that we should not think something on how to advance the work of God. Friends, in this crisis, it is my firm belief that this opens several opportunities for mission. Several days after the government announced the lockdown, a friend of mine, a businessman, called and said, and he told me about their conversation with his friend who is a Chinese businessman. This particular Chinese businessman is his partner in more than 10 enterprises nationwide. And this businessman said, isn't it that you have told me about the final crisis? What can you say about this COVID pandemic? What would happen to our business? What would be your plans? Basically, this particular Chinese, this friend of mine had given him Bible studies many times, especially during their business trips in Beijing and in many parts of the world. But according to my friend, in several instances, this particular businessman did not take seriously the Bible study, because for him, it would all be about the business. It would all be about the prophet. But at this time, during the crisis, it seems that the way is being opened for him to search deeper and deeper. And so, my dear friends, he asked, so what would be our plan? What would be our plan for our business? And so my friend said, boss, there will be crisis after crisis. And there would come a time that I will be selling my share to you. And this Chinese said, what would you do with your money? My friend said, if I have to sell my share, the amount that I will be getting would be more than enough. Even if I live multiple lives, then I could not use all the money that I will be taking from the sale of this particular share. But let me tell you that I will not be using this simply to sustain my family. This is not just simply to support me, my sustenance, but this I will be using to support in the finishing of God's work. For after all, money, there would come a time that money would be nothing, And so this businessman, upon hearing those words, he said, if that be the case, when the time comes, then I will be selling as well my share, and I will be supporting God's work. Please give me more Bible studies. Friends, Ellen G. White said, God will have men who will venture anything and everything to save souls. Crisis, in crisis, and no crisis, let it be that mission should be a part of our work. Let us explore everything, anything, and everything to save souls. Just recently, my dear friends, I read this wonderful story published in our magazine, Adventist World. It was all about the 21-year-old Brazilian by the name of Brenda Matos. You see, during this COVID pandemic, during this COVID lockdown, the TikTok apps becomes increasingly popular. This has something to do with short videos. And so when Brenda Matos saw this one that many have been using this particular apps, and so she thought of something else. She said, how could I be able to make use of this app to advance the work of God? And so with that, she designed a social media evangelism with the short videos using the TikTok. And amazingly, my dear friends, she has 45,000 followers on TikTok. And not only that, as of the time of the publication, there were 400,000 likes in the videos that she posted. And counting more, increasing and increasing. This is an example, my dear friend, of the use of technology, of venturing on anything and everything to save souls. When in fact, the Bible is telling us in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 20, when it says, when the Lord said, because God Himself has the heart for the mission, He said, bring the people to me, gather them to me as an offering, and bring them unto me upon horses, in chariots, in litters, in mules, and swift beasts, to my holy mountain. My dear friends, in this particular passage, you will see that God wanted that as we bring people, He said, bring them to me in many ways, in all ways, exhaust all avenues. Because you see, during those times, the animals were the ones used as means for transportations. And herein, you will see the enumerated animals. You could see right there several kinds of types of animals. You will see swift beasts, and even some are somewhat slow in terms of their travel. And the Lord said, whatever would it be, if it would be by way of swift beast, if it would be by slow beast, then gather them to me, use them, so that these people may know and may come to me. And even the Lord is telling us by mentioning the litters, simply telling us that if they do not have the animals, carry them to me, carry them. what is important is you bring them to me as an offering to me right now. And so, here is a wonderful passage that would tell us that we need to do something, everything, to win souls. The pen of inspiration further said, in Testimonies, Volume 9, page 109, Ellen G. White said, they must make use of every means that can possibly be devised for causing the truth to stand out clearly and distinctly. Now, my dear friends, this is something. Now, and let me stress once more that it was not only Elijah that had this heart for the mission, because this heart for the mission of Elijah was rooted in as a reflection of the heart of God. Let us try to take a look at 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 37. It says, hear me, O Lord, hear me, that his people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. My dear friends, take note of the small word thou. That particular word is referring to God. It simply means, my dear friends, that Elijah did not take credit on whatever will be happen in terms of revival and reformation. And what would happen after the prayer, it would not be to his credit, but this would be all about God. This would all be about God. Thou hast turned their heart back again. So God is deeply involved in mission. God is deeply involved in mission. Friends, this would tell us as well one wonderful lesson. And this word, thou, suggests this idea. You see, God is trying to pursue the Israelites or the kingdom of Israel, even when at this time, they were deeply deteriorated in terms of their spirituality. But the Lord pursued them despite of what they did and despite of who they were. The Lord is full of grace. And this would reveal, my dear friends, of the lesson that we need to remember, that God is full of grace. He is full of grace in terms of the mission, Now, Elijah even expressed the strength of this grace, the fullness of this grace, when he mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 36 to 37, when he made use of this phrase. It says, hear me, O Lord, hear me, that his people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. My dear friends, let us all remember that at this time, Elijah was still praying. There was no conversion yet. His prayer was not answered yet at this time. On the other hand, you will notice that this future event was already expressed in terms of the past. And I would say that this expression suggests a futuristic past. Meaning future events are expressed in terms of its occurrence already, that it had happened and occurred already. Elijah speaks of them as already turned. He speaks as if the miracle were already wrought and the people already repentant. Futuristic past. This would suggest that by God's grace is so amazing that it could make it a reality. The conversion could make it a reality, my dear friends. This is the belief of Elijah. What an amazing grace, my dear friends. What an amazing grace. Future as if it happened already, and if it happened already. And indeed, if you have to take a look at the story, right after the prayer of Elijah, in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 39, it says, they fell on their faces, and they said, the Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. What an amazing thing, my dear friends. The result of God's amazing grace. To end, let me tell you of this story. This is one of my favorite stories in terms of mission work. When I was still in Mountain View College, we organized then a church planting team, what we call as SALT, Student Association of Lay Evangelists and Teachers. And every Friday, we tried to train non-ministerial students. We identified several places for our outreach, places with no churches, and entered barangays. And we started then in one of the biggest barangays of Lantapan, and that was Alanib. We tried to survey the place, and I tried to recruit some students who would join with me on that particular mission endeavor. And you see, during that time, most of the work was all about the branch Sabbath school, for there was no church. And other companions would do the house-to-house visitations. One Sabbath morning, somebody approached me. He was running then and telling me that I need to go with him. And he said, "Kerr, would you mind joining with me?" There were two individuals, special persons, that I could not handle in terms of Bible studies. Please help me on this. I asked him, "What do you mean by special persons?" He did not elaborate. He just simply said, "Just go with me because I want you, being the leader, to be the one to give Bible studies to these two persons." I was thinking then that he had encountered with religious leaders and there was that discussion. And so I brought with me some of the books that I used to bring whenever there would be discussions. And so we walked into the house of these two persons. And when we entered the house, this friend of mine told me, "Kerr, these are the two persons which I'm referring to. Kindly give them the Bible studies because I could not handle them." And there, my dear friends, I only found out that these two individuals, two sisters, had these physical challenges. Deaf and mute. One is a deaf and mute, and the other one as well is deaf and mute. Right there and then, I was so shocked. I was so confused. How could I be able to give Bible studies to these individuals with such challenge who could not interact with me in terms of verbal interaction? And how could I give Bible studies for these individuals who could not even hear what I will be saying? Lord, I said, I am somewhat confused. But that time, I just kept on making some signs. As I tried to reflect on those signs, personally, I could say that I could not even understand those things. But I did it for several minutes. Then I finished the first session of Bible studies. But these two sisters gave some sort of signs, as if saying, you have to go back for the next week. You see, when we returned to Mountain View College, I was reflecting on this. What would be my next topic for Bible studies? And how could I be able to transmit, to relay by way of sign languages on these topics that I have to present to them? And so, with that, the succeeding Saturdays, succeeding Sabbaths, the Bible studies just continued until we finished the 28 fundamental doctrines. My dear friends, I reflected many times. I pondered on these things many times. I asked the Lord, Lord, did I make myself clear to these individuals? Will they be able to understand your teachings to them as you wanted them to understand? But friends, as I tried to analyze, I could say that there was just but one teaching, doctrine that I gave to them. And that was about the hellfire. Because many times, every Bible study, every topic, I tried to point out to the fireplace to these two sisters. And so I said, probably this is just the only topic that they understood. But one Sabbath, there was that schedule of baptism. We went to the river banks, and I could see right there 23 candidates for baptism. And I was so surprised to see these two sisters lining in the river banks to accept Jesus Christ through baptism. At first, I am in doubt because I said probably this would just be by way of influence of the neighbors who decided to be baptized. But days after, when we continued to create more interest, we visited one detachment, and the head of the military men at that time told me and said, "Sir, the two sisters were here a few hours ago, and they told us that the unclean foods, shrimps, crabs, pigs, and many more. And they told me as well that the true Sabbath day is Saturday." Right there and then, my friends, I was so amazed, and I said, how could these two deaf and mute individuals were able to understand the teachings of the Holy Scriptures? How could they be able to understand, and that they were able to transmit to these military men, and that they were able to understand your message? My dear friends, at that time, I declared and I said, this is all about you, oh God. This is all about you. You are full of grace that you try to reach. You are so inclusive, and you are trying to reach every individual despite of the impediments, despite of their situations. And you are trying to use these people, even this deaf and mute. Oh God, this is all about you. Your grace is so amazing. My dear friends, we are facing crisis at this time. And more crises are coming. Ellen G. White said, visitations will become more frequent and more disastrous. But let us not limit our eyes on the crisis. Let us look beyond the crisis and see the image of Christ. Let us see the image of God as He revealed in Mount Carmel. For the God that we are serving is the God who can answer our prayers. He listened to our prayers, and He can answer our prayers beyond our expectations. And another image, the God that we are serving is a promise keeper. And the God that we are serving, my dear friends, is the God who is full of grace, who would reveal Himself in wondrous ways while we do the mission for Him. God bless everyone.